facilities that make this program possible are provided by the City of Highland Park and have been made possible in part by Ravinia Festival, CJE, Senior Life, GAN Music and Sound.
And welcome to Cahnmann's Current Events Roundtable. Today we have a very special guest, and it's part of my series on religion, and that Jewish people come in different ways and the different styles, and we had somebody from the African American community who is a rabbi, and today we have another very, very special rabbi, Rev Roy Schwartz, who is from the Chosen People Ministries, and he's from the Messianic Congregation of Chicago. And I want to welcome Roy as my guest today.
Thank you.
And it's a pleasure to see you and meet you again. And I've had the pleasure of your company, and I have been going to different types of synagogues and religion, and it's kind of my specialty. I love to learn about new religions, old religions, people of color and their religions, and everything. So this has been something very special, and I want to share it with my audience. Because I think Messianic Judaism has kind of gotten a little bit of a bad rap from the traditional Jewish people, because I think one of the biggest problems that I see is that they don't understand really what it is. I mean, you hear, Jews for Jesus, it's all, I remember myself, I think I mentioned to you, I was on an airplane going to Tel Aviv, Israel, and I was sitting between a Christian woman and an Orthodox Jewish woman, and the lady who was the Christian lady gave me her Bible to read, and it was the part of the Bible that starts, with the apostles and Jesus, and I was starting to read it, and the woman on my right, who was an Orthodox Jewish woman, grabbed it out of my hand and said, you can't read it. It's not for you. You can't read. Jewish people can't read the New Testament. So I want to talk to you, what is that all about, and why can't Jewish people read the second part, which is the other part of the book, the new traditional, which is not the new, it's still the other part of the Bible, from Genesis to the Christian version, which takes part, most of your readings come from the Old Testament. So the Old Testament goes into the New Testament, and what is that all about? Why are we not allowed? And I just want to remember that Rabbi grew up from your parents had an Orthodox home.
My mother was raised Orthodox.
Your mother was Orthodox. You were bar mitzvahed in an Orthodox synagogue.
I was, yes.
Okay? See, I remember that from my readings about you. And so, what made you change, or did you change? And what is this all about? Not being able to read.
Well, I think, first of all, I came to believe that Jesus was the Messiah when I was young, in my 20s. I was traveling cross country and met some people who were into Jesus, and I argued with them. I was from New York, traveling cross country, and every argument I gave, they would show me the Bible in the New Testament where this was so, and I, like you, thought the New Testament was for Gentiles, not for Jews. And so every argument they give me New Testament scriptures, and finally I said I'm Jewish, and I figured that would end the discussion. They said, "You're Jewish." Well, our Messiah is Jewish, our Bible's Jewish. If it weren't for you guys, we wouldn't have either. And I'd never had a response like that. And I realized that maybe because of the way I was brought up, my mother had being raised in Germany, experiencing, some of the horrors of Hitler. She was from Berlin, and so, we were raised with an antipathy toward Christianity, and that Christians are just raised to hate Jews based on my mother's experience, my father's experiences. And so when I encountered these Christians and they had a love for the Jewish people, I was a little bit more, I was taken aback by it. And it was a time when Godspell and Jesus Christ Superstar had come out, and I saw these movies, and because of their influence, I watched them, and I was just amazed at the Jewishness of Jesus. I'd never really given any thought to him. I always thought he was Catholic. I mean, in New York, you're either Jewish or Catholic. So I thought he was Catholic, and as I saw this, I realized how Jewish he was, and that then I started. I read the book Paradise Lost, and realized that there was other forces at work in the world that I had no idea about, demonic forces. Paradise Lost talks about that, about how there is a whole world of demons, and so having a tenderness now toward a Jewish Jesus. Then I started reading the New Testament and realizing, wait a minute, this is Jewish.
Why do you call him a Jewish Jesus? I mean, instead of just Jesus. And I also noticed you call him Yeshua.
Right. Well, that's his name in Hebrew, and he was Jewish, and I think the tendency as Jewish people, we tend to remove him from the Jewish community, to see him as something Gentile, not Jewish.
So by saying Jewish Jesus, you kind of make sure that people know that he was. Don't most people know he was Jewish?
Well, I didn't really line it up as a Jewish person. I always thought he was Catholic, and so when I read those books and started reading the New Testament, I realized just how Jewish Christianity really is, and as I read, I was just impressed that this was our faith, and so some of the prejudice that I had. That closed me to it, like your Jewish friend saying this is not something that Jewish people do.
Actually, I have to correct you. It wasn't even my Jewish friend. It was a woman sitting next to me on an airplane. I never saw her in my entire life before.
Right.
She was an Orthodox Jewish woman she may have been from Israel, and she just took the book out of my hand and gave it back to the other lady. Yeah. So I didn't even know. I mean, it was so traumatic for her that I was reading a book. That wasn't, that it was a forbidden. I felt it was like something forbidden. I wasn't supposed to read it, and I often wondered why that Jewish congregations. We learn about the Book of Genesis. We learn about the Old Testament, and the New Testament is a continuation of the Old Testament. Why don't rabbis or Hebrew schools or Sunday schools of the Jewish faith, why don't they expose their congregation or the children to the continuing on book?
Well, they don't see it as a continuation. They see it, they equate it with the Book of Mormon or some other cultic book. They don't see it as something very Jewish. But the prophets foretold, Jeremiah specifically, that there would be a new covenant. And those that are followers of Jesus believe that he is the Messiah who was promised to Israel. The rabbis teach us all the law and the prophets were for nothing but the days of Messiah. And so what the New Testament does is it shows how the prophets foretold Messiah and how Yeshua, Jesus, fulfills those prophecies.
How do people from how did they feel about Messianic Judaism from the different, from Orthodox, the Orthodox community, from the conservative community, the Reformed community? What are their feelings about Messianic Judaism? And have you spoken to any of their congregations?
Well, I've been in their congregations. I was bar mitzvahed in their congregations. But after I became a believer, I really wasn't welcome in those congregations because they thought I had betrayed the faith by embracing the God and the Messiah of the Gentiles. And so typical response. I can't speak for every Jewish person. In fact, we have a saying, you get 2 Jews, you have 3 opinions. And so I'm not sure that I could speak for any Jewish person. That each one of us have different ideas about what our faith is. But most non-believing, non-Jesus believing Jewish people feel that to be a Messianic Jew is to embrace something that's clearly not Jewish. That we, as Jews, we can accept almost anything except Jesus. And I think the reason is because of so much persecution that has happened to us in the name of Jesus. And I think that's why there's such a strong antipathy toward Jesus and Christianity, because of so much hatred, the pogroms, the Inquisitions, the Crusades. I mean, there's just a history of terrible things that have happened to us in the name of Jesus by Gentiles. And so we think it's not Jewish.
But if Jesus was alive, in those days, he was Jewish, and he was also. That's why they killed him, because he was Jewish.
Well, I don't think it was because he was Jewish, but because the multitudes believed he was the Messiah, and he didn't stop it. If he had stopped them from declaring him to be the Messiah, then they probably would not have persecuted him. But the fact that he claimed to be the Messiah, and the multitudes of Jewish people believed he was the Messiah, the reason they had to get rid of him was that they feared that with that messianic fervor there would be a militancy that would cause Rome to react, and thus cause the religion and the temple and our people to be scattered, and our religion to be dismantled. Under Rome, they tolerated us because we existed before Rome. And so we were allowed to observe Judaism. But what Jesus was teaching was antithetical to the common interpretation of what the law taught, and to the leadership that we had. And so they feared that there would be riots, and Rome would react to those riots. And so the high priest said it's necessary that one person die in order to maintain our religion and to save the nation. And so pretty much it was a political and a fearful thing. But they didn't realize that Jesus came not to bring a kingdom of this world, but a kingdom, a heavenly kingdom, to fulfill all the promises, to take the law that was written externally on stone tablets and put it in our heart, and to give us the indwelling of the Ruach, the Spirit of God living within us.
How did you come to believe in Jesus? What did you? Because you were a rabbi, and
I wasn't a rabbi before I came to faith.
Okay, but other rabbis, now that you talk to other rabbis, I'm sure you discuss it. Do you ever have? I know, because I've been to many different synagogues that welcome Christians. They have a Christian spiritual leader that comes in, to give some speaking engagements, but they don't do that to the Messianic Jewish people.
No, because they feel that we are such a threat to Judaism, because we claim to be fully Jewish and yet believe in Jesus. Whereas Gentile Christians, they're less threatening because they're not traitors as we are, as far as Jewish theology goes. To embrace Jesus is the ultimate betrayal among Jewish leaders and among the Jewish community.
You're kind of brave to brave it out too, because I'm sure that you've had some real.
In our generation, things have become so loose and so theologically diverse, that our people now accept almost anything except the real religious. And the religious see us as a threat, as something totally contradictory to everything Jewish.
Because I read just recently, Pew report says that 34%, there's 34% of Messianic Jews, plus it could be even more than 34%. These are the people that they did a study on. That's a lot of Messianic Jews.
Yes, a lot of Jewish people have come to faith in the Messiah.
What all of a sudden? Because I know on Passover we set up a glass of wine for Elijah, and Elijah is supposed to be the Messiah, waiting for the Messiah.
He's the one who's supposed to tell us about the Messiah.
Yes, he's the person that's bringing in the Messiah, or telling about
Heralding.
the Messiah, or heralding the Messiah. And the Jewish people, because still that we're in war and things are still happening, the Messiah hasn't come yet. How do you know that the Messiah has come, where the other Jewish people feel that the Messiah hasn't come? I think that's the differentiation between the two, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, for us as Jews who have come to faith in Messiah, we believe that as we read the scriptures, that it points to Yeshua, and that he is the promised one. And those of us who have come to that faith, our lives have been transformed. The things that we've been looking for, we found in him. He's the hope of Israel. And we see it we see him as the fulfillment of the Messianic hope. Now, the Jewish people who don't believe it believe that because he did not bring peace on earth and the millennial kingdom, the reign of goodwill toward man and peace on earth,
and what happened in the Holocaust and all that?
All the terrible things. They say, well, if he was the Messiah, this wouldn't be happening. But one of the things that are in the scriptures is that there would be two comings of Messiah. The rabbis actually interpret it as two Messiahs. They see one as Messiah ben Joseph and the other Messiah ben David. This is a Talmudic teaching. Messiah ben Joseph was the one who would be like Joseph, the beloved son of Jacob, betrayed by his brothers, sold for a price of a slave, winds up becoming the deliverer of the Gentiles, Egypt, saves Egypt, and then ultimately his brothers come to Egypt begging bread, and he reveals himself and in fact becomes their savior.
See, I never knew who the Messiah was supposed to be. No one's ever, it's funny because we know that Jesus was known to the Christians as the Messiah, but I never knew, being Jewish, when they talk about the Messiah coming, I never knew who that person was until just this moment. Just this moment on the Cahnmann's Roundtable, I never knew who the supposedly Messiah was supposed to be.
Yeah, so one Messiah they describe as Messiah ben Joseph, the Messiah that all of our Jewish people are waiting for is Messiah ben David. And Messiah ben David is the reigning king who rules and reigns over the nations and brings Israel into her glory. But we want Messiah ben David. We don't want Messiah ben Joseph. We don't want a suffering, betrayed Messiah. We want the king. But in reality, when Messiah returns, when Yeshua comes for Israel, Israel will recognize Yeshua, the coming king, as also the one who was betrayed by his brothers.
That's really interesting. What is it that a lot of the Jewish people, the major stumbling block, according to something that I read by an author here, what was her name? Tamar Fox. She's an associate editor of MyJewishLearning.com. Says things, the major stumbling block remains that the Messianic doctrine of proselytizing, yes, a good word, remains a core principle that is trying to convert. Is that what it means?
Well, prior to Christianity, Judaism was a proselytizing religion. Our responsibility as Jews was to be a light to the nations. That's one of the things God called us to be. We were to be a kingdom of priests, and we were to give the truths of God to the nations. At the time of Jesus, there were plenty of Gentiles who had converted to Judaism, and that was our responsibility as Jews, to bring the light to them. Unfortunately, many of us look down upon the Gentiles. But our role was to be the priests of the nation. And in the future, the day is coming at the return of the Messiah, and just before the return, that Jews actually will fulfill their responsibility to be evangelists. Certainly the Lubavitcher evangelists, they're evangelists to other Jews. But
when you may say the word evangelist, what do you mean? Because
sharing the good news. To evangelize means it comes from a Greek word meaning to bring good news. Evangel.
Because when we hear of evangelical Christians, is
Yes.
that, you know,
That means sharing the good news.
okay, because a lot of us didn't know that what that word means.
Yes.
You know, we just like Protestants, being a Protestant or a Catholic, an evangelist. You know, we didn't realize that they, you know, because I know the evangelists also they are. Now, do you associate with the evangelistic, evangelicals?
Yes.
Evangelicals,
Yes.
I love that. Evangelicals,
Yes.
so they're very much.
What evangelical means is people who are willing and wanting to share the good news that Messiah has come.
So there's evangelical Christians,
Yes.
and evangelical Jews.
Well, there were the evangelical Jews today are the Lubavitch, who seek to bring Judaism to Jews, to bring Jewish people back to Torah observance. So they're evangelical. They are bringing Jews back to the good news of loving God, serving God, and obeying His commandments. So they are evangelicals.
So what is so wrong of when she says that, you know, trying to convert? Maybe it's they're trying to convert Jewish people to become Messianic Jews. There are Christians I know in your Messianic congregation. You have both Jews and Christians.
Right, Gentiles.
They're Gentiles are different than Christians?
Yeah. Well, yeah, actually, Jews are God's firstborn among the nations. Gentile means nation. So any nation any person who's not of the Jewish nation or of the Jewish people is a Gentile. Christians are both Jews and Gentiles who have embraced Yeshua as the Messiah.
Okay, and in your congregation, there's both.
Right, they're Jews and Gentiles who have embraced Yeshua as Messiah, and there are also Gentiles who are not yet Christians who come to our congregation, and there are Jews who are not yet Christians who come to our congregation.
Now, are they baptized, or are they, circumcised? I mean,
well, the Jews tend to, if they're Jews, if they're truly Jewish, then they have been circumcised, and Gentiles. You know, some Gentiles nowadays are, but we don't really examine.
Yeah, okay, so I was just wondering how a person becomes a Messianic Jew.
Well, by believing that Yeshua is the Messiah, believing that He paid the penalty for their sin, and trusting Him for atonement. Prior to Jesus' coming as a Jew, in order for us to have atonement, we had to go to the temple. We would lay our hands on a lamb. We would bring it to the doorway. The priest would hand us the knife. Most of us don't realize that we had to kill the lamb. We would take the knife and
You're
slit.
talking about the high priest.
No, the high priest. No,
They had to do that. The Kohanes.
No, we did it.
Who's we?
A person who wanted atonement.
Okay.
The priest would instruct us how to do it. The priest would offer the blood on the altar. But we had to kill the lamb. And we had to recognize, as we laid our hands on the lamb, that this lamb was dying for our sin. And so there was an exchange of life. The lamb's life for my sin. And the blood was the life of the lamb. And the priest then would offer it on the altar in the temple on my behalf. But I had to kill the lamb. And so we believe as Jews who have come to faith in Messiah that Yeshua is the perfect lamb that was to come once for all. And He provided everlasting atonement for us so that we don't have to kill animals over and over again. They were pointing to a perfect sacrifice that would come along.
That is really, really interesting because I really didn't understand some of this. And how do people come to accept Jesus? I mean, why would they? I mean, if they went to Hebrew school like you did, and how would somebody? Why would they? All of a sudden, what their parents taught us or taught them, what happens?
Well, essentially, we believe it's the Spirit of God. God's Spirit helps us to recognize Yeshua as the promised Messiah. Our hearts are touched. We recognize that He paid the penalty for our sin, that we recognize that we're sinners and that we need kapora, we need atonement, and that He loved us and came for us and provided for us atonement. And we come to embrace that. And when we do, the Spirit of God enters our hearts, our lives are forever changed.
Because I'm trying to figure this all out because there's so many, there's so many different forms of Judaism. And in Israel even, if you're not converted in Orthodox, you're not considered, if a person wants to do a conversion, if you're doing a Reform conversion, you're still not considered Jewish.
Right.
So if you want to be considered Jewish in Israel and you're Messianic, are you accepted or are you not? And how do people become? How do people come to become Jewish? If whom accepts them?
In order to return to the state as a citizen, if you are Jewish, you're welcome. In fact, recently the Supreme Court ruled that just because you've embraced Jesus doesn't mean that you're not Jewish anymore. I mean, many Jews have embraced some alternate religions like Hinduism and Buddhism. They're Boo Jews, Hin Jews.
Right.
Right. But as far as the religious Jews are concerned, if you accept Jesus, that's it. You can't. If you're a secular Jew, you're welcome back to the state. If you don't believe in anything, if you're an atheist, you're welcome back to the state of Israel. But for a season, the Orthodox refused any Jews who embraced Yeshua. They felt that was the deal breaker. That was embracing the God of the Gentiles, and thus you were no longer really Jewish. But really, that's not true. I mean, I was born a Jew, and I'll die a Jew.
How did your mother feel when you
She was not thrilled.
Should I say converted? Or
Yeah,
converted?
When I accepted Yeshua, I wouldn't say converted.
You're not really converted, but accepted.
Yeah, she was not happy. Initially, because my parents raised me kind of liberal and grew up on Long Island, and they were just relieved it wasn't drugs. They figured this was a phase I was going through. But when I went into ministry, when I actually became a leader of a congregation and went to school to prepare to lead congregations and start them, that was not a moment of great joy for my father. He was very liberal, and he was just happy that I was a good person and believed what I believed, and it was good for me. And actually, he came to faith a year before he died. My mother, who's still living in the Promised Land, Florida, she hasn't yet embraced it, but she thinks my children are wonderful and is very happy for me and my wife.
So she doesn't give you a hard time?
No, not
And what
anymore.
about you have a brother? Or
a sister.
A sister?
Yeah.
And what is she?
She came to faith, and she's not very zealous for the faith, but she believes that Yeshua is the Messiah as well.
So now your mother has two children that...
yeah, there goes the neighborhood.
There goes the neighborhood. And tell a little bit about, we have a couple of more minutes left. What is the Messianic congregation that in Chicago that
It's near Wrigley Field. It's a Messianic congregation, so it's essentially, we meet on Shabbat. We actually use the facilities of a church on Cornelia, 1709 West Cornelia in Chicago, and we have worship services every Shabbat at 10:30. Last night we had our annual Passover Seder. It was the last night of Passover, and so we observe the Jewish holidays, but we observe them in the light of Messiah.
Now, do you observe Christmas too and Easter?
Not really, no. First fruits is what Easter is. Yeshua rose from the dead on the Jewish holy day of first fruits. He died